start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background as an OT?
Sure. So I am an occupational therapist. I have a pediatric practice in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Although it's mainly pediatric, we do see all ages and abilities. So um, in our practice, what occupational therapists do is work with people with physical, cognitive, and psychiatric disabilities. So we treat an entire human being all at the same time. Um, Within that, it can be everything from, helping develop strategies for a person who has a spinal cord injury so that they can get dressed or drive a car or whatever the case may be, all the way to individuals who have depression or attention deficit disorder or motor planning issues. So they have a hard time moving their body or paying attention or things like that. So we do a lot of different things here. I'm also a certified professional dog trainer. I have been training dogs as long as I have been an OT. I trained for 25 years service dogs for people with disabilities, not guide, not hearing, specifically service dogs. And in that 25 years, I've also been training dogs to work with people in occupational therapy, physical therapy, dental clinics, all kinds of different things. And a very large part of my job has been traveling around the world, teaching people how to open practices that do what I do, or going into training organizations and teaching them about disabilities, or training them what it is that dogs actually do in somebody's practice. For example, here in our occupational therapy practice, we may have, let's say we've got a 9-year-old kid who has mild cerebral palsy and they need to work on their arm strength and being able to handle tactile, different sensations on their hand. And we're also working on postural stability. So I might have a dog on one end of the room hanging out on a bed, and on the other end of the room, there's a bowl with kibble. And that kiddo will go and get one of the kibbles, get on a scooter board on their tummy. So they're flying like Superman and they have to use their hands to propel themselves across the room to get that kibble over to a dog. That same kid, after he makes some progress, we may go and do an agility run. So we have a yard here that is capable of doing agility, and we have the tunnels and the jumps and all of those things. But he has to teach the dog how to do this. So he has to go through the obstacle course himself. So now we have this 9-year-old kid with CP going through the tunnel and coaxing the dog to follow him. Having him step over or jump over the jumps, and then the dog follows him to do that, et cetera, et cetera. In other settings, when we work with individuals with autism, sometimes we are helping them to understand the perspective of another being and trying to read body language. And a lot of times it's very intimidating to look into another person's eyes or process all of the words that even people who specialize in autism still use too many words a lot of the times. And everybody's brain processes information at a different rate. So a lot of the times when we're working with dogs, we're looking at their behavior and their responses to the individual with autism so that they can figure out, okay, what is it that this animal really enjoys and what is it that is very confusing? Or if they get stuck on just their own topics and they see that, a dog just goes and lays down and is pretty bored with it, then they have to figure out how to get into dog mind and figure out something that they will both enjoy. So there's a lot of different ways that we work with the dogs in practice here, and the sky's the limit.
So, how did you first get interested in working with animals in therapy?
Well, so my entire life before occupational therapy was working with animals. I was sure that I would be a veterinarian. From the time I was 4 years old, everybody knew that I would be a veterinarian. But the problem was I began working with veterinarians and I would see how poorly people treated their animals. And I'm a pretty outgoing personality, and I would help them see what it is that they were doing. And I found myself under a lot of stress a lot of times because people weren't taking care of their animals, or, um, and it's not like they were, most people, have legitimate concerns. Oh my gosh, I'm not sure if I can afford treatment, things like that. But it
Mhm.
was the people that would not treat their animals and say, oh, we can just euthanize this dog and go get another one at the pound.
Okay.
I I would stress out so much that it became toxic for me, and I didn't want to be a part of that. Um, I I've never believed that the world is full of sunshine and puppies. That's not the case, but there has to be a very happy medium in the work that we do. And there's always going to be some difficult things that we do, in our careers or even in our lives, but we all have a threshold, right? And so me being in examining rooms with individuals who didn't want to or
Mhm.
refused to take care of their dogs, um, that was my threshold. I couldn't do it. So the veterinarian that I was working for at the time, um, had recommended, that I go and hang out with one of his friends that was doing physical therapy in a Veterans Administration hospital. And so I went and hung out there, and I ended up being the pool therapy girl. And so people would come in with spinal cord injuries, and I would help direct and run around and assist people to get movement back, in a gravity lesson to play and all of that. And it was still, pretty painful. These folks are in a lot of pain. They have injuries and
Yeah.
they're sore and it's tricky. But I would notice that I would see them in the morning in our sessions, and then I'd see them in the afternoon and they were laughing and having a good time. And it smelled like cookies in this other area. And
Mhm.
so I started investigating that, and it turned out to be occupational therapy, which was a very different functional approach. And OT is where you work with people on goals that are meaningful to them, not what I think is important, but what my clients think are important. I am a wish granter. Tell me what it is that you wish to do, and let's see if we can figure out how to make it happen for you. Well, turns out that one of the big motivators for a lot of clients is dogs, right? When
Mhm.
people are in the hospital, they're missing their dog. And, all of us when we're young have these big dreams of having our own dogs when we grow up, et cetera, et cetera. So, my change in career actually started in my last semester of occupational therapy school, where we had to infuse occupational therapy into something that hadn't really been done before. And
Mhm.
so I actually chose assistance dogs, guide, hearing, and service dogs as an assistive technology option, thinking about how a lot of people who are in wheelchairs don't get as much physical contact just because they're protected by big wheelchairs or walkers or whatever the case may be. And people have a lot of social decline after an injury, illness, or aging, and animals are always very meaningful. So I ended up infusing OT into that kind of thing, and one thing led to another. I ended up with a dog in my practice, and um, that dog was going to be a demo dog for assistive technology, but we had so much fun in the sessions. And this dog loved playing things, ringing bells, and romping and playing with the kids in the sensory room, and on the trampoline, all of these things. It was just so much fun, and it really enriched this dog's quality of life. And
Oh.
I just happened to be really creative, and I would look at a client's goal and say, okay, we're going to do this. And so if they had cooking skills, like somebody had a stroke and they needed to learn to cook again, but they weren't motivated to cook for themselves, no problem. We're going to make dog treats, and we're going to make those dog treats for your dogs. And then I ended up developing a cooking book for humans and hounds. So that it was making meals that you could actually sit down and eat with your dog. And
Oh.
so it was all of these different things. And I love the creativity. I love that I was making dogs happy. I love that, kids and grandmas and grandpas were happy. And it just, they always say that you have, your perfect job is one in which you feel like you've never worked a day in your life. And while I'm a very hard worker and always busy, I love what I do and it lights me up and it keeps the soul fires burning.
What kind of training or preparation do the animals need?
So, that's a very tricky thing. I love that you chose the word preparation in there. In the big scheme of things, dogs, as far as training goes, they do need some basic manners. We don't want them knocking people over or, you know, um, barking incessantly at somebody, things like that. But the fact is, there are so many different ways to practice, whether you're a mental health provider, a nurse, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, if you work in the juvenile detention center, or if you provide mental health services one-on-one where people are literally sitting there talking to you, those are all very different dogs, very different skill sets. Um, Here in my practice, I have 7 dogs because no one of them is perfect for every single client that comes in. Each of my dogs, they're not all here at the same time, but each of my dogs has their own caseload, and the dogs get to pick who their clients are. And it's usually based on their age, their experience, the things they enjoy. But it's also based on their aging. We have to think about how quickly dogs age in this process. And really, for working, they're typically only working, if you're doing this from the time they're young, they're only working about 7 or 8 years.
Oh.
And, if we do that kind of math and I say, okay, my dog's preferences are different between 6 years old and 8 years old, the same way that if I asked you, what were you doing 15 years ago? Are your interests still the same? They're not. And so part of picking the right dog for the job is really understanding the job. And so one of the things that I teach in any of the courses that I teach, whether it's UNF or through Dogwood or just conferences, is that we have to create profiles. And so I teach people to say, let's look at you as a human, as a handler, as a dog guardian. What are your skills? What's your knowledge? Are you able to really understand communication? So many people think that their dogs are really happy when it's appeasement or things like that. And while we don't expect everybody to be, dog trainers or, specialists in behavior, there is a certain amount of information that you need in order to do this job
Mhm.
for a lot of reasons. One, we want to keep our animals happy, but um, 2, we need to make sure that we are doing no harm. And that means to our clients and to the dogs that we work with, right? So once we understand what our capabilities are, then we build a job description. The same way when I'm hiring an occupational therapist in my practice, I say, I really would like an OT that has these 8 skill sets.
Right.
And then I interview, and none of them have all 8 skill sets. But I look at the one that says, wow, you've got really strong skill sets here. How can I fill in over here? Maybe I give this part of the job to somebody else, or I take on those clients, that kind of thing. I do the same thing with my dogs. So when I say, okay, what is the job that my dog is going to fulfill? That can look very different because my client population is different. Sometimes I'm working with a 5-year-old, sometimes I'm working with a 65-year-old.
Oh,
And those are very different sessions. So we create a profile. Here's the job description. Here are the things that I really need. And then we start looking at our dogs. And in the ideal world, if somebody is just starting out, they don't have a dog yet, they should be looking at breed specific traits because people tend to pick the dogs they think are the cutest, or I want a small dog. And so they pick up a Chihuahua.
oh, yeah.
And that is not necessarily the best choice. So the big thing is we look at breed specific traits. Who are the dogs who really like to work and enjoy themselves? And, if I'm a mental health provider that really does do talk therapy, I probably want a lap dog, right? A King Charles Cavalier, a Lhasa, a dog that is going to sit in my lap and just be happy being pet. But if I am working in a spinal cord injury unit And I've got people that are really down and depressed and don't have a whole lot of things to look
Mhm.
forward to because this new injury has changed their entire life. I don't need a dog that needs to be pet. These are individuals that can't move their arms. Um, I do want a dog who barks. I want a dog that is gleeful and excited when that client walks in the door. I want the dogs like, oh, that is the dog that I want.
Right.
Because for a lot of clients, whether it is that person who has lost hope, or if it is a 12-year-old kid that has been in 22 foster homes and nobody's ever been happy to see him before because he has behavior, that initial meeting and noisiness and excitement from my dog, that is when I start making the relationship. And that is when they get excited. And then they're looking forward to it because my dog is excited to see them. They think
Mhm.
about that. They describe that to their friends, their family, and they want to come back. When we
Right.
have those clients that really need dogs to be really excited, that's
Mhm.
the dog that I want to be at the door. I want, I mean, my dogs currently, they know when it is their client and they'll hear the car door and then they get excited and that dog goes to the door to wait for them and the other
Mhm.
dogs go and take a nap. They know. So then we have to stop and think about as our dogs age, what is the right dog? Because the dog that we initially start out with is not the same dog in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, right? So typically what I see happen with, the perfect dog, it is a dog who is flexible. It is a dog who can entertain themselves but likes to be a part of everything. It is a dog um, who can sort of roll with the waves. And sometimes we have a plan. And the obstacle course comes out or the agility equipment, and the dog is very excited to do it, but then a kid has a meltdown and we don't end up doing it. So we
Right.
need the dog that's going to, be able to kind of be okay with that. Um, so when our dogs are aging, it's interesting to watch them because when they come in at, a year and a half old, they're excited to work with everybody. They want to be a part of everything. They're so excited. And then
Mhm.
at 4 years old, they kind of chill out a little bit. They're waiting to see what's going to happen, and then they start to make more choices. They're like, yeah, I'm not really into that, or I am into this, or whatever. And then around 6 or 7 years old, I noticed that they start wanting to work with the older kids and the teenagers. And then
Mhm.
around 9 years old, I noticed that they want to stay in the lobby with the parent. And sometimes the parent is the one who needs the most help. And that becomes the most important job. You have a mom with 2 or 3 kids with autism. She never has an hour to herself. Those are the moms that I don't bring into the session all the time so that they can learn the skills. Those are the moms that I put on the couch in my office, leave them with, a nice cup of tea and calming music and a dog. And then I disappear and work with their kids because that's the only hour per week that they have to themselves. Um, and that can become very powerful. So, you know, it's interesting. There are a lot of evaluation components to selecting and keeping track of what a dog enjoys and loves. We can look at personality, we can look at obedience, we can look at, how they work on a leash, how they work off of a leash. And it's very, very different. Here in this practice, dogs do not work on a leash. I do want my dogs to be able to move away if they're uncomfortable with something. There are
Mhm.
communication buttons up all over the clinic so they can press a button and say all done or outside, or if they run
Mhm.
out of water. And so then they are communicating, and my clients can respond and go, oh, he doesn't want to be in here anymore. I wonder what he wants. And they open the door. Turns out the dog just needs to run to the bathroom where somebody came in the other door. The dog greets him and then comes right back. And so a lot of organizations want their dogs working on a leash. They want their dogs to be very obedient. They want this, that. I
Mhm.
want my dogs to have a good time and I want my dogs to communicate with me and tell me what it is they need. I don't want to guess all the time. I do my best to do that. And, with a lifetime full of, you know, um, behavior and training and all of those things, that kind of experience in my back pocket, it could be pretty easy for me to look at things and go, oh, well, I think blah, blah, blah. But sometimes the dogs behavior, they're conflicted and it's
Mhm.
hard to tell what they want. And so by allowing them some of that freedom, as long as you have taught them open and clear communication, they will communicate. And so for me, that's the biggest thing. I want a dog that will communicate with their body, a dog that'll problem solve and say, wow, I keep on giving Melissa all these cues and she's not getting it. So I'm going to give her a different cue and I'm going to go press this button so she'll open the door or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So I think everybody looks for something different, but we have to consider the dog in front of us and we have
Right.
to know who they are and what they enjoy doing. Um, I I know that the first dog that I worked with in practice, his name was Jesse. He was a cream retriever. Um, he had formal training from an assistance dog training organization, and they thought he would be absolutely great in the practice. The problem was this was a dog that was overtrained, and that meant that he would just comply. He would do anything that I asked him to do. So if I asked him to lay on a bed, he would lay on a bed. If, that early in my career, when there was nobody to be a mentor and I was just trying to figure things out, um, if a kid would crawl over to him or pet him too hard, he would just lay there and take it. He wouldn't get up and just be like, dude, I don't like that.
Mhm.
He didn't have the voice that I wished he had. And so it was always really tricky to figure out what is it that he really enjoys versus what is it um, that I'm just asking him to do. And again, that's a very different thing. Some people want a really obedient dog that will do anything they say. And I want my dogs to communicate. And if they are uncomfortable, I want them to move away. And then I want to be able to help problem solve. Was it the client they didn't like? Was a client off medications? Did a parent come in who had been drinking? Um, I've had several dogs that just cannot connect with people who have been drinking or over medicated or under medicated, and which is a
Right.
really great sign. It's great information for me because they exhibited very specific behavior. And then I'm like, okay, so my treatment plan has changed a little bit now. And now we're going to go work on this more of the parenting skills. And let's talk about why you're so, you know, why you're using alcohol so much or drugs or, what do we need to do to get this under control? This isn't parenting, right? So I have always said that there is no specific dog. You have to understand what the job is that the dog is going to do. I have not met an evaluation in my lifetime that can cover all of the different skill sets that a dog can possibly have. There are a lot of really good things that give us really good information. Recently we talked about the PATA evaluation, and so we can look at personality. Well, those components of personality are really helpful because it helps you identify patterns and probabilities and things like that that are going to happen. And it doesn't mean that a dog is not a good fit. It means that this dog may not be a good fit for these things. When there's surprises, maybe this dog needs consistency, those kinds of things. So I think there's no one way to answer that question. I think it's a question that every single healthcare or human service provider needs to ask themselves, what is the job I'm trying to fill? And then what is the breed most likely to want to do this kind of work?
Mhm.
And then what can I do to support this dog? How can I help prepare? And so now we move into preparation. Okay, now I need to learn relationship development so this dog trusts me, knows that I've got his back. We need to work on the socialization of people, places, things so that they understand this is the world and the world has some surprises, but they can be good surprises. Um, all of those kinds of things. And I think that once people really figure out what they want and who their dog is, then you can figure out, is there any match at all? Um, is it that my dog really likes senior citizens and I work in pediatrics? Well, if I really want to work with this dog, I'm going to have to change populations and jobs.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to have to, search for a team if somebody is doing the diamond model where the therapist calls in a handler and a dog to work in their sessions with clients.
Mhm.
Um, that might be, one of those things where I say, as I'm interviewing, I need to find the dog that is going to fit this job description. So
Mhm.
it's just different for every single person in every single job. And there are no two sessions the same.
Yeah, I really like the way you look at things. Animals' well-being is very important as well, not just doing the job. Yes, that's impressive. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
Um, so we are working on showing how the UNF certificate goes beyond theory, right? And actually prepares people to work hands-on.
Yeah.
From your point of view, what do you think sets this certificate apart from other animal-assisted therapy programs?
Well, I think there's a lot, and we worked really hard to make sure that we infuse this program with things that we didn't see in other programs. So initially, there's the foundations of animal assisted services. That is some of the theoretical backgrounds, and those theoretical backgrounds are really important because they exist. We look at some of the work of Cynthia Chandler to, you know, talk about what are those special moments that happen within sessions that teach you how to identify this may not be what you expected, but here's what you're getting. And it turns out that's even better. We look at a lot of theoretical foundations and we ask people to look at the theoretical foundations of their own discipline. So if you're an OT, you're going to look at that framework and who's done work in that area. If you're a nurse, you're going there. Mental health provider, same thing. Then we move into animal welfare and care plans in animal assisted services. And this is all of that stuff about looking at animal behavior and creating ethograms and looking at um, the health, welfare, and well-being, and making sure that we're doing our very best and teaching people that these things all look different for different dogs. A lot of people want to work, if they work with people with physical disabilities, they say, oh, well, I'm going to get a dog that only has 3 legs because my clients can relate to that. Well, that may not be such a great idea because that animal has special needs and now he's getting overuse injuries, in his hindquarters from jumping up on a plinth to be with people, or elbow injuries from jumping off, right? So we want to help people to understand how to work with an animal instead of saying, oh, I use my animal in occupational therapy. That's not what we do. We work with them. We also teach people that they are still the primary stakeholder. They are the practitioner. So I'm the occupational therapist. I do the evaluation. I do the treatment planning. I make the choices for what's going to happen. I have chosen to work with this dog because it is meaningful to my clients, et cetera, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus saying, oh, I'm an animal assisted therapist. That's not actually a thing. You have a license and a degree for your discipline, and then you choose different treatment techniques. And we want people to really understand that difference. Having an animal in practice, any species, is not magic. It takes a lot of planning and careful thought and considerations for both the animal and the people that are engaging. And we just want people to be able to analyze situations and sort of be able to predict what could possibly go wrong and prevent that from happening the best that you possibly can. So, in that particular section of the course, we also teach people how to start initiating some of the treatment planning. That brings us into session planning for special populations. And that's where everybody says, okay, here's the population that I'm working with. We teach them how to create treatment plans within those kinds of sessions that will match everything they learned in the animal welfare and care plans. So now they're starting to build all of these really great treatment plans, and we're giving feedback and saying, okay, here are the considerations for the client. Here's considerations for the dog. Okay, what's going to happen when your dog ends up with diarrhea and can't go to work and your clients are really looking forward to seeing them? What are you going to do then? So we teach people how to work within all of these different things. Or if you just have a dog that isn't feeling it that day. They're like, I'm just vibing in the office. I don't want to work. That's okay. We can do other things. We then take people into administrative policies. And this one is the one that people usually approach and going, oh man, this one's going to be rough. This is no good. It's really hard, but it's also the one they learn the most from and they are the most grateful for by the end of the course. So in the administrative policies, we teach people how to do um, informed consent and release forms and how to actually build a program, how to identify standards of practice and competencies that will work within their practice setting. How to identify specifically the different kinds of insurance that you need, because professional liability is not going to cover any kind of animal assisted treatment or education, or even, support programs. You need additional insurances and you need to be able to name specific things like bodily injury. Dog forbid your dog, a car backfires and the dog, gets startled. Because it was right out the window and you've got a kid with cerebral palsy and they have a Moro reflex and they tighten up, but they've got a fistful of your dog's fur and they can't let go of your dog. And now the mom is screaming and worried and the dog is, upset and turns around and bites him because this kid has their fur and can't let go.
Mhm.
That is a very unfortunate accident, but it is one that could very easily happen. And the best dog in the world, this can happen to. So what do you do in these specific situations? So again, it's a lot of predicting and preventing and setting yourself up for success, making sure that everybody understands what's going on, whether it's the zoonotic risk factors, which are cooties that can be transmitted between humans and animals, or even things that animals can carry that humans transmit to other humans. So we talk a lot about all of that. And then the really big fun part is the capstone project. And this is the one where they are going to build their ideal program. Everything from administrative policies to treatment plans or session plans or education plans, whatever the case may be. And so they spend 6 weeks building a PowerPoint presentation and a paper that describes the foundations and the animal welfare and session planning and, competition and marketing and all of these different things. So it really helps individuals build a program from the ground up. And what we're most proud of is that these components are all very necessary. But if you look at individuals who have been doing this for, 20, 30 years, they don't even have these things in place. So we know that all of the things that we are teaching, it is really cutting edge and very necessary for what
Mhm.
people need to do. And on top of all this, we're growing additional courses so that people can sort of pick and choose the different kind of courses that they need. Maybe somebody needs more information on animal behavior and communication or animal preparation. Maybe they just need to know more about zoonotic risk factors. Um,
Mhm.
maybe it is somebody that got a brand new job in a hospital and they're an administrator and they're like, there's this animal assisted treatment program and I don't even know what that is. What do I need to do? Well, the administrative policies and procedures are going to be perfect for you because that is the overarching, um, you know, uh, program development of every single program.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow, that's very complete, isn't it?
We are
So,
very proud of it.
yes, it's amazing. And have you seen a growing interest in this kind of work among professionals and clients?
Yes. So
Yeah.
this is a body of knowledge that continues to grow and grow and grow. 27 years ago when I first started engaging in this, there wasn't even anything in an occupational therapy journal, magazine. Nobody was really talking about it. And there was one article within all of our magazines and peer review journals, but it was actually about volunteer visiting because somebody had used the wrong terminology.
Mhm.
And we see people wanting to do it more and more. And there's a lot of do-gooders that are like, well, I really like my dog, and my dog is so great with, you know, my sister's kids when they come to the house. And, I
Mhm.
want to take my dog to work, and all of these kinds of things that people have interest in. We try to help them understand, the difference between you just want to take your dog to work because you think it's fun versus what is your dog going to think about this, who has been in your house for just 5 years within your yard, maybe some walks, things like that. And suddenly you put him in a busy hostile environment. Let's talk about what happens then. Um, Versus, okay, well, I just graduated college and I'm ready to get a puppy and I'm ready to go and do this. Where do I start? Well, let's start by getting you, an internship, or find a rotation or somebody to volunteer with, so you can see what this really looks like. Um, so helping people find the resources that match their needs.
Mhm.
Sometimes we have people that have really great dogs that are totally appropriate, but they need supervision and mentoring. Okay, well, so let's see if we can find you a mentor that you can Zoom with, once a week or once every 2 weeks, and um, make sure that everything is going okay and that you can get your questions answered, those kinds of things.
Okay.
So it is a growing field. Um, and from the client's perspective and other healthcare professionals, most of the people that come to Dogwood, my practice, they are referrals from um, psychiatrists, primary care physicians, mental health providers, other therapy clinics, because these individuals are very interested in dogs and they have not done well in other practices. And they feel like this might be very motivating for them.
Mhm.
In other cases, I have veterans who come in, and they would like to gain more skills with their dog, whether it's emotional support or a full on psychiatric support dog. And so those are some of the areas that it's moving into, where a lot of healthcare practitioners are also becoming certified professional dog trainers, or gaining more information on behavior, so that then they can, help unify that household, so that, the therapeutic value continues to happen outside of a session. So
Right.
there's a lot of growing interest. Take a look at the
Yeah.
media.
Wow. Well, amazing, right? Um, and all this conversation has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Of course.
And then there is one more question.
Sure.
Is there anything you would want um, for the new practitioner? I can't pronounce this word, practitioners.
Practitioner.
Practitioners, that's it, to know before bringing animals into their sessions? Like, is there
I
anything
think
you would
the
want them?
single biggest thing is continuing education, because you don't know what you don't know until you see it, right? So, in order for any practitioner, whether you're an educational provider or a healthcare provider, you have to have continuing education in a specialty practice in order to do that. Animal assisted education and animal assisted treatment are specialty practices, and you are required to have continuing education before you are offering this kind of a service. And, different people need different kinds of continuing education. So, I would say make sure you know what is required from your state board for complementary practices, or alternative practices, things like that, and the kind of training that is expected, and then get that continuing education. Try to find a mentor who can give you a little bit of supervision as you begin this kind of a journey. And for those practitioners that have already been doing this 10 or 15 years, there's always something new to learn, whether it is about the animals that you work with, or if it's about policies and procedures, or even making better treatment plans. There is something for everybody to learn.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. That
You're
was it.
welcome. Thanks for having me.